For everybody. Okay, I will now call to order the February 22nd, 2021 Clarke County School Board meeting. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Any questions about tonight's agenda?
I would move that the agenda be accepted as submitted.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Approval of consent agenda. Are there any questions?
I would like to make an amendment to the February 8 minutes on page 4, the last paragraph. The words, the chairman of the Board of Supervisors should be inserted into the sentence so that it reads that it was not something the chairman of the Board of Supervisors was interested in, and there was skepticism among other members. There was a little bit of concern that's we don't want to represent that it was more than one person's opinion, and even that opinion was based on hearsay. So, we just get that straightened out. Thanks.
Okay, so may I have a motion? I guess
I'll move to
As
approve the
amended.
consent agenda with the amendments as presented.
may I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. Ms. Carlbert. Okay. Presentations and recognitions.
Yes,
School
in
board.
recognition of the dedicated service of school board members throughout Virginia, February, as this year, as it typically is designated as School Board Appreciation Month. The theme of this year's celebration, 115 years of providing leadership, advocacy, and support, reflects the partnership of the Virginia School Boards Association with local school board members as they serve their divisions and advocate for public education, local, state, and federal leaders on behalf of all students. Locally elected and appointed school boards play an important and vital role in representative democracy, and decisions made by local boards of education directly influence instruction in Virginia's public schools. The decisions affect the present and future lives of children, and also set direction to prepare all students to be competitive in a local, state, national, and global 21st century knowledge economy. Board members contribute hundreds of hours each year, whether it is crafting policies, hiring staff, listening to staff and student concerns, or recognizing outstanding programs. Board members always keep their eyes on the goal of student achievement. And in appreciation of your time and dedication to students of Clarke County, we thank you for your service. There has been no job in public education or in education period for the past 9 months, 10 months, or 11 months, I guess now, has been easy. And I know you've had a lot of sleepless nights and worry over how we would get back to school. The effect of the coronavirus on staff, on students, and our community. And as a small token of our appreciation, we do have a gift basket over here for each of you. We won't bring it over right now and put it in front of you, but please make sure you get that before you leave. So thank you very much for all that you do for our students and our staff in Clarke County.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, superintendent's update.
Just a couple of items this evening. It was reported at the last meeting that we were currently in the process of making arrangements for clinical placements for our Clarke County High School nursing students. Valley Health has arranged for our students to continue their field placement, or to begin their field placement at the hospital. 18 students from the current year and 8 from last year are being considered for placements currently. I know Ms. Waring has been working with Ms. Marasco and Dr. Seal and Valley Health to make sure that all of our students have, as well as transportation, to make sure that all of our students have all the appropriate paperwork. So a big thank you to Valley Health for working out a plan for our students to be able to complete their requirements for the nursing program. Special Education Advisory Committee recently conducted a parent satisfaction survey. Although there were only 34 responses, the survey provides some insight into overall satisfaction with the SPED program in Clarke County Public Schools. The survey's there. You've had an opportunity to take a look at it. I don't know if our SEAC members want to make any comment about it or not.
I will. It was unfortunate that we didn't get more responses, but of the families that did respond, it was, I guess I would say, better than expected, considered the pandemic schooling conditions. There were some comments about wanting their kids to go more days a week. And I know we'll talk about that in the upcoming reopening plan. So I'm really hopeful we'll be able to meet that for the SPED and the SPED students that are phased in. But I'm really glad that that we put this out, and that we got some really good specific feedback.
And one other comment I'd like to make. One particular question that we spent probably a little bit more time on than the others was, how has your child's mental health been impacted by the way school is currently being held? And so 38% said stayed the same, 26.5 said declined, and then 29.4 said improved. So there is concern, especially about that 26.5, but then also regarding the 29.4 that it's improved. That could also be an indicator that going to school causes anxiety in children, and that number may flip when it's time to go back. So there are some children who are quite comfortable with, the limited social interaction and pressures, elimination of pressures that you feel at home versus being in the middle school, high school, elementary school, whatever the case may be. So I think that that's something to keep an eye on, and I am really appreciative to everyone who took the time to fill out the survey in our community.
Okay. Dr. Bishop, I do want you to comment on one thing. So unfortunately, I feel like we go through this every year, but we've all received a couple of emails over the past week suggesting we might not be adhering to the Code of Virginia guidelines regarding our meeting and public hearing notices. And so, Dr. Bishop, can you just comment on that, please?
Sure. So the public hearing is required by code to be advertised 10 days prior to the public hearing being held. Our meeting was properly advertised in the Winchester Star. I believe it was January 28th. Ms. Weir works closely with the Star or the people at the Winchester Star to make sure that it is in the paper at the appropriate time. There is no requirement that a draft budget be included as part of any announcement. Our documents are out there for the public to see. We have had some requests for additional documentation, which we've provided. So that one is not an issue. The second one about meeting notices. Code requires that a public meeting be announced 3 working days prior to the meeting being held. Our meetings are announced very early on after you have adopted your calendar for the year. So in January, every meeting of the Clarke County School Board was already announced, basically on January the 4th. It is on our website. It is on our monitor out here in the hallway. And the materials have to be made available to the public at the same time they're made available to the school board members. In a nutshell, that's those 2 code sections, and we have every reason to believe that we're in full compliance. When this has come up in the past, we have sought legal counsel's opinion, and they have confirmed that we operate according to the Code of Virginia.
Does anyone have any questions about that?
No.
Okay. Thanks, Dr. Bishop. Audience comments, those wishing to speak, it's limited to 3 minutes per person. Those wishing to speak should fill out a speaker's card and present it to the clerk. Ms. Weir?
No one has signed up.
Would you like to speak? No? Okay, great. Okay. Dr. Bishop, consideration of FY22 proposed budget.
So there are quite a few attachments. I made some, not last-minute changes, but changed how the documents were attached. When we get to the point of the salary scale conversation, based on the feedback and input from the last meeting, turn it over to Mr. Catlett, who spent countless hours putting the scales together to represent kind of where we are currently and some alternatives or some different options. So the final budget presentation, you know, this is an ongoing kind of labor of love. Is this on? Yep. Okay, here we go. There's that. Get loaded. So as part of the budget presentation back at the end of January, you were presented with lots of statistical information to start with. One that often gets discussed is related to our ADM. We are basing our budget on anticipated 1,713 students next year. That is down. It is no secret that the enrollment in Clarke County has been declining for approximately a decade. This year with COVID, it didn't make it any better. As you've heard me reference several times, we had 104 students that we anticipated an enrollment decline from the last year to this year anyway. What we didn't anticipate was the impact of the coronavirus and COVID on enrollment and how it would be affected even up until the start of school on September 8th. So we lost an additional 104 students to private schools, to homeschooling, and some parents did choose to defer kindergarten enrollment. But historical data, we've been really good about following here in Clarke. Mr. Catlett has tracked this for a number of years. And between the two of us now, although he does probably about 95% of it, this year I took more of it on than I have in the past, since ADM is such a crucial part of our budget development process. Average daily membership, just another representation of how our membership has declined over the last 10 years or so. School enrollment by school.
Excuse me.
For each of the schools, again, just a line graph representation, I should say. Religious exemptions in homeschool. You could see that our homeschool population had been on the decline for the last few years until this year when it did spike, and we believe that that has a great deal to do with COVID. Our special education and 504 population, it wasn't until about 7 years ago that the Department of Education really started to break out students who are identified with special education needs and those who are identified as 504. Our disadvantaged enrollment has continued to trend upward. Just a few years ago, we were sitting at about 16%. And now we're closer to about 25%. English language learners has also been on the increase. So we have the students who are currently receiving services and those who are still identified but not receiving services currently. Pupil-teacher ratios. I've mentioned this one in the past. It is misleading. If you go to the state website and you look at the the pupil-teacher ratios that are found in the superintendent's annual report, you'll see something like 12.8 to 1 in Clarke. that takes into consideration every staff member who is identified as an instructional staff member. Not only teachers, guidance counselors, school-based administrators, the elementary schools, it would be our specialists, folks who don't currently have a class all the time are counted into that calculation. Also, something that can skew that calculation is the number of multi-disabilities classrooms, as an example, where you might have 1 or 2 staff members and 3 or 4 students. But that staffing is needed in order to meet the needs of those particular children. On-time graduation rates. Clarke County Public Schools has continued to have one of the top on-time graduation rates in the state for a number of years. And you can see the yellow bar actually it represents the state average. Our composite index, you've heard me say before that everything that happens on our budget is related to our composite index. 0.5729 currently is higher than our neighbors in Frederick and Winchester, also our neighbors across the mountain in Loudoun County. And just a reminder from the code of what our responsibility is, mine as a superintendent as well as yours as a school board. We go through a significant amount of data to get to the point where we are currently in our budget. So again, we're basing our ADM next year on 1,713 students, plus 40 students in our pre-K program. Just a reminder, the 40 students do not count in that ADM calculation. So for each building, you can see the projected enrollment for next year. As an example, Cooley, 421. The red number indicates where they were enrollment-wise as of January the 12th.
Dr. Bishop, how are you getting these numbers in red?
From our student information system. Okay. Students who are actually enrolled in school, it doesn't matter whether they're virtual or hybrid, they're enrolled in Clarke County Public Schools as a student at Cooley.
Okay. And this doesn't include children who aren't in the system this year but are coming back?
I'm sorry, would you repeat that?
Sure. So the numbers in red don't include the children who chose, you know, private school, homeschool.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep, if they are not currently enrolled, they are not in the red number.
Okay, thank you.
However, that's a good point. For those parents and families that did respond to the survey that we put out, if they indicated that their child was going to return to Cooley next year as a 4th grader, as an example, they are counted in the 421.
Okay, okay.
Again, just a reminder of the composite index. We go through every line in the budget, reviewing it for accuracy, line by line. We did receive requests for several new positions, as we do every year. For this year, you know, we know that intervention specialists are going to be critical as we look to hopefully begin school in a more normal environment at the beginning of next year. We know that our students have suffered in many ways over the last 11 months, and we want to make sure that we're equipped to be prepared for their return. We did conduct our salary comparisons, as we typically have done, between Winchester, Frederick, and Clarke. Budget recommendations are in alignment with our community survey that we've done and the strategic plan. Once again, we've done our school-based funding based on a per school and or per pupil basis. And then I just referenced the parent survey of new homeschool, private school, and deferred kindergarten enrollment students. So we actually sent that survey out twice. Community budget survey this year had 321 responses. You can see what the top priorities are from 1 to 12. Our strategic plan, just a reminder of what those 5 primary goals are. The school-based allocation methodology, there's a rhyme and a reason behind the amount of funds that are allocated to each building. And then those funds are administered by the school-based administration. But there's either, again, a per school amount or a per pupil amount. So the formatting got a little messed up there. So our operating budget factors. This is just a representation in a table. Let me back up one. Of the increases over the last few years. What we've seen since 2014-15 is that health insurance and proposed salary increases drive our budget more so than anything else. As a matter of fact, in most years, just like in this year, the new request from the county is actually less than the increase in salary or the increase in health insurance combined. And I'll point that out when we get there. So for FY21, our teachers did receive a step increase. It's averaged a little over $600 per person to move from one step to the next. No other employee received a pay increase for the current school year. We did have the December bonus, which was much appreciated, and that was done in partnership with the county. We had no increase in health insurance for the current year. And there was a little over $200,000 reduction in the transfer from the county. But you can see how that plays out all the way back to FY15. Just a few notes about teacher salary. Virginia ranks 33rd. This is not a Clarke County issue, and you've heard me say that before. It's an issue of the Commonwealth of Virginia. Virginia does rank 33rd in average teacher salary, at least in 18-19 they did, the most recent data that I could find, compared to a national average of $62,000, so almost $10,000 less. Estimated average teacher salary in 1920 is $53,933, still about $10,000 less. And Virginia ranks 10th in median household income and is the 9th wealthiest state. Just another way to represent our salary increases over the last few years. So, over the last week, there has been a lot of conversation, at least. So, the governor's proposed budget back in December had a 2% bonus for school employees included. For Clarke, that was a little over $87,000. Remember, though, only SOQ-funded positions are included in that calculation, and it's offset by the composite index. So if the calculation of SOQ-funded positions meant that Clarke should get $100,000, offset by the composite index, we would get $43,000. Last week, the governor announced that additional state revenue had been found, and the 2% bonus would be converted to a 2% salary increase. At the same time, the House and the Senate came out with their budgets. The House budget included a pay increase of 5%. And in the last few days, Governor Northam has then come forward and said, I would agree with the 5%. The Senate budget included a pay increase of 3%. And I've already mentioned compensation supplement funds are offset are only funded for SOQ positions and are offset by the local composite index. So proposed bachelor scale is actually on the next page, but it contains 33 steps, a starting salary of $44,000, a 5% pay increase for employees. And let me flip over there and we'll just take a look at those milestone steps, 0, 5, 10, 15. You can see how our proposed scale for next year would compare to current salaries in Frederick and Winchester at the same steps. For each 1%, we always like to give you that number just so you can have a kind of a mental note of what 1% costs. It's a little over $161,000. We have recalculated that. When this was first presented back at the end of January, that number was a little over $164,000. So as I've said to you the last two meetings, we'll continue to work on the personnel side, which is 80% of our budget, or nearly 80%. So we're at 161, a little over 161 for the cost of 1%. 62% of our employees in Clarke do have a master's degree. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Catlett. There are attachments in your onboard docs with the salary scales.
Thank you, Dr. Bishop. So, Renee, you want to pull up those spreadsheets, please? Excuse me. So, in the attachment, you'll see 5 spreadsheets, and just to give you a little bit of order to this, the first spreadsheet represents what Dr. Bishop already mentioned, was that our teachers received a step increase, and so that first spreadsheet is meant to illustrate what that looked like at each step. Spreadsheets 2 and 3 are the comparisons, and we call those 2 spreadsheets the cost to match Winchester, and I'll explain that in a little more detail. The 4th spreadsheet you'll see there is the original proposal that's reflected in the executive summary for next year. It represents the 5% increase. And then the 5th spreadsheet are just some scenarios if we were to try to use the Winchester scale as a guide, or if we wanted to try to match that. So I'll start with the first spreadsheet, and you could probably see it better on your screen than on the display up there if you have that pulled up. So you'll see the salaries, and again, these are bachelor's level salaries. You'll see at each step during 2019-20, that would have been last school year. And with a step increase, that simply means that a teacher at step 1 last year, they got to pay at step 2 on that same scale. So you just adjust that as you see, and so the increase was anywhere from 0.73% to a high of, I think, 2.12%. So the average increase for a teacher was about 1.3%, again on average, for an average dollar amount of $669. And the far right column shows the number of employees we have at each step, and so the estimated cost for that step increase, which was $115,000. And again, that's in salary, pure salary cost only. It does not consider the additional costs of salary, which are, like we talked last week, FICA and VRS costs. So if we go to the second spreadsheet, that is the spreadsheet that you would typically see at a finance committee when we're having more like a work session and studying where we are compared to our market area. Recall that several years ago we had a salary study done that was very comprehensive, included counties south of us, smaller counties south, but it also included districts to the east, including Loudoun. And we decided to scrap that study and go with a more realistic comparison, our true competition, which has been identified as Winchester and Frederick. In this comparison, we're using Winchester to simplify it, but also because Winchester generally is the higher of the two between Winchester and Frederick. And so again, I shared this briefly at our last meeting, so you could see what we call the cost to match. If we were to place our teachers on the Winchester scale, you see the difference, the dollar amount difference at each step. Again, this is last year's data. Generally around $1,000 to $2,000, but as high as $4,000, you see step 8. And if you were to, again, insert the number of teachers at each step in Clarke, you can do a simple computation of the cost to match at each step and take that down summation at the bottom is the cost to match last year was $433,000, and we talked about that. Take that same thinking and that same idea and go to spreadsheet number 3. You'll notice that we did gain some ground because, as we've mentioned a couple times, our teachers did get a step increase. And in Winchester and Frederick, there was not an increase. There was not a step increase. And so we did gain some ground with our scale versus our market competition. Again, that was, the $115,000 investment helped us gain some ground. And so if you take that same thinking and apply the difference at each step and the number of teachers at each step, and you can get a cost at each step, and at the bottom it reduced that difference down to $305,000. Make sense?
The average difference in pay in spreadsheet 2 was $1,000 to $2,000, and the average difference in pay for spreadsheet 3 would be what?
So in spreadsheet 2, you look at the dollar. We're looking at the dollar difference.
Yeah, you said it was 1 to 4 total, per step in comparison, $1,000 to $4,000 difference.
Approximately.
Yeah, and then you said that the average was somewhere around 2, and so I'm wondering, what the average decrease is in spreadsheet 3.
Right. I didn't make that calculation, but I mean, if we just look down that third column, the dollar amount varies from $580.
Yeah, so it's maybe 20% less or 25% less. So we can just say
It's less. So
yeah,
we did gain.
If you look at the absolute number, 305 versus 433.
Right. Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
And just to clarify, this is to match last year's or this current school year's salary, and we don't know what next year is going to be in
Correct.
Winchester. Okay.
So if you were to make an adjustment today, during this school year, that would be the difference for this school year.
Yeah,
It doesn't consider raises that we would apply for next year or that they may apply. This is just an as-is scenario for right now.
Okay. And just to point out, when you look at the bachelor's level salary for Winchester, it stays the same for a cluster of years. So if you look at year 9, it's $51,398 all the way to year 13 of teaching. Whereas in Clarke, it increases each year. So I think that that's something to take into consideration as well. And you've talked about that, Mr. Catlett, in the last meeting.
I did. In the attachment as well, there's some talking points. And I didn't mention that, but it is in the talking points. So, for example, as Ms. Hobart said, a teacher with 8 years experience last school year in Winchester was making the same as a teacher with 12 years of experience. Right or wrong, that's the way it is. Similar clustering was happening in Clarke a number of years ago, and the reason for that clustering could have been a number of things. It could have been intentional to cluster them like that. Could have been a result of salary freezes. We went for a number of years where salaries were frozen for a while, and so then you could get steps that are clustered together for that reason. About 7 years, we intentionally declustered our steps because the board, the admin, we wanted to see a difference between 7 years experience and 12 years experience. We felt like most scales you see in education are experience scales. And so if we're going to have an experience scale, we felt like there should be a difference between at each step. So again, we had a similar situation years ago, but we intentionally created separation between the steps. So thanks for pointing that out. If you go to spreadsheet 4, This represents this shows our schedule, our salary schedule for the current year. And we simply applied a 5% increase at each step. So that the middle section you see there, experience through 2021, and then a 2021-22 bachelor's level salary with 5% increase. You can see that at step 0, the dollar increase is $2,115. And of course, when you apply a percentage increase to a higher salary, the dollar amount's going to be slightly larger as you go down the steps. So we go from $2,115 salary increase to, at step 27, you're at $3,033. And at step 33, it's $3,220. Again, that's applying a flat 5% increase at each step. You also see, we've illustrated there as well the dollars between steps. And you'll notice that in steps 0, 1, 2, 3, it's not real smooth. It goes from 900 to 300, 900 to 500, then around $600 between each step. The next column you see over is the same application of 5% salary increase, but we simply adjusted steps 0, 1, and 3 to level that a little bit so that we didn't have the fluctuations so great between 0 and 4, or 0 and 5, if that makes sense. And also in the right column under the 5% increase with adjustments at 0, 1, and 3, you'll see that's where we intentionally drove the step 0 to 44,000. And that was mentioned, Dr. Bishop mentioned that earlier, that we intentionally had our step 0, our starting salary at 44,000. So 2 steps vary from the 5% in that model. The step 1 would be 5.44, step 2 would be 5.69, and then the others are at 5%. And then the dollars flow a little more evenly between steps in that scenario. That salary schedule is what's reflected in the FY22 executive summary. So the executive summary and the bottom line that you'll see in a few minutes, Dr. Bishop, correct me if I'm wrong, but when you look at the bottom line here in a few minutes, the bottom line reflects that salary schedule. There could be another option under this model where you take the equivalent of 5% and you determine that dollar amount, but then you would then calculate a flat amount to apply at each step so that every step gets the same dollar amount increase. We've done that before. That would compress the schedule or the scale. So that's just another approach to applying a salary increase. It would mean, when you do the math, that the lower steps, or the steps 0, 1, 5, etc., they would have a higher percentage increase, much higher than 5%. And then the steps at the higher salaries would have a much lower percent than 5%. I know it's a lot of numbers to look at, a lot of numbers to digest, so if you have questions, please ask. I could do a check for understanding if you like. Because when we ask students, do you have any questions, sometimes you get blank stares like I'm getting right now. So then moving to the fifth spreadsheet. And this is the one where if we were to look at using a scale to match Winchester, if we felt like their clustering makes sense, and if we wanted to then target that to get closer at each step, rather than continuing with the schedule that we've intentionally created, we could do that, but you'll see the effect of that, and I did explain that last time we met, that if we wanted to try to use their schedule and implement their schedule, it means that our salary increases would fluctuate wildly, and it means that at one step there'd be a salary decrease, and you have some steps a 1% increase up to, I think the highest you see there would be 7.45%. That's because of that clustering you see in the Winchester scale.
As a tool to help you attract and retain teachers, do you think switching to this scenario 5 would be helpful? Or more helpful than a different option?
Perhaps to recruit, not to retain, though. I don't think it would help retain. I think that maybe recruiting, if someone were to look initially to compare us against Winchester, Frederick, and hey, what salary might I get? They might look at that. I really don't know. But I think that at least for the first year of doing this, I think that we could have some upset folks. I know we would, because some would get, a $700 increase, and depending on, the luck of the draw on Winchester's clustering, you could get, a $3,000 increase. Now, keeping in mind too that this is just using their scale for this year. So if you were to adopt this approach, it seems to me that you'd have to add a percentage increase on top of these numbers, because the overall increase, when you look at this schedule, is less than what we've proposed in our 5%. This was just put here to illustrate what would happen to our schedule. So to take this another step further, if we were to take in the numbers here that we used come from the numbers in spreadsheet number 3, the $305,000 it would take to match Winchester. And if you were to take that dollar amount divided by the number of employees that we have, you would have and spread that across each of our steps, it would be a $1,736 increase if you wanted to apply the same dollar amount at each step, rather than have these wildly fluctuating amounts.
That's, when you say employee, you mean just the education staff that follows the teacher scale?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And there are 176 employees that are paid based on the teacher's scale.
And so just to clarify, make sure I understand this, if you're looking at someone with 33 years of experience with a bachelor's degree, and we're using the Winchester scale from 2020 to 2021, that teacher who's been teaching for 33 years is only going to make $415 more. Is that
In which scenario?
looking at spreadsheet number 5?
Well,
Yes,
right?
yes.
So you've spent almost your entire career dedicated to education, and you get $415 more.
I would point out too that the recommended schedule is not this schedule.
Uh-huh.
It's the one recommended.
Press schedule.
This, well, and, right, and to just show us
Yeah, this.
what we were asking for.
Sure. This is, you're absolutely correct. And this is meant to illustrate if we wanted to try to model Winchester's schedule, that because we've intentionally indexed between steps, that there are built-in inequities if we do this.
Mhm. That's a huge inequity, and I'm
Yes.
not in favor of that.
Are there is there a particular year or years of experience where we tend to lose a greater than average number of teachers?
It's been pretty variable the last few years. Some newer teachers who have gone across to the east, to some more experienced teachers who have gone east for a variety of reasons. Some money related, some because of family circumstance. It's not always money. More often than not it is. But over the last few years, we've had, I don't know, there hasn't been like people from, once they get to 10 years of experience in Clarke,
Right.
they go east.
Okay. I was wondering if
Um,
it could be beneficial to target
no.
specific
This
areas.
past year, we had a couple of newer elementary teachers that had taught 1 to 3, 4 years with us that went east. And we
Okay.
also, the year before that, we had some veteran teachers, 20-ish years of experience, one from the high school, one from the middle school, who went east. That's just an example.
Okay. Thanks. So what's your recommendation of all these different scenarios?
Obviously, we want to try to pay people as much as we can to compete with our colleagues in Winchester and Frederick. I stand behind the 5% recommendation, however, for many of the reasons that Mr. Catlett mentioned. We've spent considerable time building a scale that reflects some step, whether that's right, wrong, that's typically the way education scales are done. And it's taken us 6 years at least, to kind of get to this point. Certainly understand wanting to retain teachers and hire teachers. And I tend to agree with Mr. Catlett's statement that I think initially out of the gate, a higher salary would attract maybe an additional pool of applicants that we might not otherwise attract. Retaining them would be for reasons beyond money in some cases.
Okay.
Mr. Catlett, thank you for doing this.
You're welcome.
So I'm just going to go ahead and say that I'm really in favor of just going ahead with the 5%. I know, when we talk about teacher salary, we talk about, making sure we can recruit people, recruit teachers. But something that's kind of hit me when Mr. Catlett mentioned retaining. And I think this year specifically, I'm trying not to pick one over the other, but this year particularly, I am focused on trying to retain. I'm not sure how easy that'll be anyway. I think that's going to be across the country, but that's sort of my focus today. Next year might be differently, but it has been a struggle this year. We all know, I don't have to say any of this, but I think if we can get a 5% increase, that hopefully conveys how important it is that we keep the teachers we have already. that's kind of where I stand right now. I don't, obviously, we can talk about this more. Any other comments?
Just the state proposed. You'd said the House was saying 5%, the Senate was saying 3. I'll just use 4 as a simple number in between. But if that 4 comes out, and we get 43% of it, so does that 2% count as part of this 5?
Yes.
But,
And what you'll.
but the other counties, because of the difference in the equation, would receive, instead of 2%, they would receive a higher number because their numbers are lower in the
Composite index.
percentage that
Correct.
they have to pay is lower than us.
Right, and it's not unusual in the second year of the biennium to see some weird language. As an example, you might see something like, and I don't know that this is the way it'll play out, I want to make that clear. But sometimes you'll see some weird language like 5% increase, but it has to be done from the 20 to 22 biennium. So that means if you did give a salary increase last year, let's say you gave 2% last year. If you gave 3% this year, that would meet the requirement of giving 5% during the biennium. So the devil will be in the details.
So in that case, the state isn't giving you money, they're just crediting, or they're basically crediting you for what you've already done?
Right.
Okay,
And you
that's-
did it
that's what I
locally. If you
thought.
did a salary increase, you did it locally because if you recall, the governor pulled the 2% pay raise off the table last year,
Yes,
rightfully so, during the pandemic, kind of late in the spring, because we were all not certain of what was going to happen.
yeah.
So sometimes you will see that weird language that comes out in the second year of the biennium, 5% during 20 to 22, that biennium. So if you gave 2 last year, you would have to give 3 this year to meet the requirement. And you also have to watch when the raise becomes effective.
Yes, I remember that
Because
from
July
past years.
1, if it's a 5% raise effective July 1, that's a true 5%. If it's effective January 1, it's not a true 5%.
For this budget year,
Correct.
yep. Okay,
But oftentimes, the locality's left holding the bag, trying to decide whether to go ahead and front the money, if you will, to pay the 5%, knowing that it doesn't kick in until January.
but I brought it up just to reiterate the point that, in theory, if the state gives the money, you would think all counties would start off the same with if it's 4%. But that 4% is modified by the equation that puts us at 57% and other counties at lower. So we have to run harder to stay even.
Right, and you can turn down the money if you don't have the money locally. So if 5% increase is passed, that means you're going to get $200,000 in revenue, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
If you say, well, in order to get $200,000 from the state, we have to put forward $700,000 and we don't have it, then you don't take the 200.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so you don't have to give a pay raise if the
Oh, I understand
locality
that.
if the locality couldn't afford it.
That would not fall under a good retention strategy, I don't believe.
Ms. Ryan?
I don't have another question right now.
Mr. Turkel?
So Frederick County's looking at a 7% increase on top of this year. Winchester City just spoke about 6%, and then chasing Frederick if 6% didn't do the job. And we're talking about what would be a 5% increase to put them where they are before they throw those percentages on. And I think, obviously, that just speaks to the importance of doing everything we can to stay in the game. It's interesting that, our teachers received the step increase this year. I was not aware that Winchester and Frederick hadn't. I think that's great for us because it means that we close the gap just a little bit. As we see the numbers in absolute, it was a gap closing of 25 to 30%, which means we still have 70 to 75% not there, and that's what this 5% would get us to. I don't think it's enough. Again, the point is we need to remain competitive with our peers, and we are just seeing that we may be able to tread water with a 5% increase, and that is that's not doesn't seem to be good enough. I appreciate that there's not an easy way of getting us to targeted competitiveness based on the differences in the scales. I didn't like the idea of the 5% increase because it just made it sound like it was some arbitrary merit assignment, and it wasn't really well received. So, I was pushing for, let's just get competitive, and the number is what the number is, but we focus on that. It does. So one criticism that I've heard is that we say that we want the teacher scale to be competitive, and yet when resources are provided to us, we spread it out among teachers and administrators and don't stick with the plan to focus on teachers. It's interesting when I look at the salary history slide that I don't really see that that's the case. In FY20, we had 4% for teachers and 3% for administrators. Anytime it was across the board, it was either 2.5 or 3, which really you can just call that cost of living increase and not really, big steps for competitive reasons. But nonetheless, that perception persists. And so I guess the question then becomes, in the proposed budget, I think it's 5% across the board. Is that correct? So it is that. And I guess I would like to see a differentiation of some sort between the teacher pay scale so that we can stay consistent with that message, that we are focused and prioritizing staying consistent with the notion of competitiveness for teachers, and that we're not being criticized for dragging along everybody else. Warranted, I would say, but I also would say that it's not being digested well by our community.
Mr. Hobart.
So I am in favor of the 5% increase. I do think I don't feel this way, but I'm going to say what some community members are saying, and they are saying that teachers don't deserve a raise, and that this past year people are fortunate to have a job, and jobs in the private sector are going away, dwindling, or you're not getting a salary increase at all. And I hear that, I understand, and I see it within my own family. I also think, though, that the conversation needs to stay locally rather than looking nationally. And clearly, we've had a struggle nationally with the conversation regarding education, but also, law enforcement. And I think it's important to remember that we're not Chicago, we're not Fairfax, we're not New York City, this is Clarke County. And I firmly believe that our teachers have worked hard over the past year and trying to figure out this way of teaching that they've never thought possible. Last year at this point, I don't think that any of us were thinking that we would be where we are right now. So, but also, cost of living comes into this increase. And as it's been said before, it's it's not a merit-based salary increase. It's not looking at a teacher's evaluation and saying, you know, you're doing a great job communicating with parents, you're meeting all of the requirements in your lesson plans. So I think that it's important to remember that that's not what we're doing here. We're trying to make sure that teachers have a living wage and that they can focus on teaching rather than having to have multiple jobs to meet the needs of their family.
I said I made some of these comments at our work session. So I'm gonna repeat some of those. I mentioned in our finance committee meeting, I think it was last week, that we have been put into a position of where we have been defending our teachers like we have never had to do before. You know, there was a lot of backlash when we were deciding if we do virtual or hybrid at the beginning of the school year. A lot of the community members were saying, you know, teachers are the essential workers, they have to go. You know, we've been accused of being this teachers union, which, if you know, Virginia doesn't have those. And so here we are. And so these teachers who have been, by the way, teaching under two different delivery methods, now that we're in hybrid, they have to clean their rooms over and over again, required to do some health checks. We have these kids in class, and we are asking our teachers to please manage the CDC guidelines, which right now, 6 feet social distancing, masking. They are essentially like the technology help desk, you know, having to help parents or students while they're teaching virtually. And then they're they're planning on their off hours. I mean, I think a lot of us have teacher friends, and we've heard sort of the same pain points. So, you know, we don't talk about teacher increases as merit increases. I think that's more of the outside world. So when people say teachers haven't done anything, why are we giving them a merit increase? Teachers have done plenty. They have done plenty. And there aren't teachers here to speak for themselves, but I'll just say it's a bit of an insult. Because they've had to work really hard this year. And the other thing I just want to note, I understand this differentiation between teachers and administrators. I know we've done it in past years. I'm just not for it this year. That's not because I don't want to do more for the teachers, but I just feel like our administrators have done a lot. When we have our superintendent scheduling COVID clinics to make things easier for our teachers to receive these vaccinations, and we know other counties or other states, they can't even get their teachers vaccinated. There's something to be said about that. So I feel like our administrators have worked really hard. So this year I'm not in favor of the differentiation. So I think that's really. I understand we're still going to be behind Winchester and Frederick. I mean, 7%, and what was the other one? 6? I mean, if they get that, that's great. But I don't know. I'm focused on retaining the teachers we have, and regardless, they're going to leave us if they aren't already planning it. So we can only save so many. You know, the other thing is our testing scores, SOLs. Like, we need to retain these teachers to help us with those scores. Again, something else. Community talks a lot about how our scores aren't good, or, you know, our kids aren't getting educated. Well, let's take care of these teachers that are doing that right now. I'm not saying I don't want to be able to recruit. Obviously, I do. but again, this year I'm really focused, I want to be focused on taking care of the teachers we do have. So that's kind of where I stand there. Any other comments or discussion?
do.
Ms. Ryan, did you have anything?
I do. Just to kind of piggyback on what Mr. Turkel said, I mean, I don't disagree at all that our administrators and of course our teachers have worked really hard this year. And I think that the point was that he was trying to make, that he was making was that this isn't about deserving or merit. This is about targeting the money towards the area where we need it most to retain teachers. So while I absolutely value our administration, the place where we have a turnover problem is in the teacher ranks. And so I would be open to talking about a differentiation if we feel like, especially if we feel like we might not even get the 5%. You know, we're hoping that the Board of Supervisors gets it, but I would be in favor of keeping that option on the table this year.
I like this, you know, and just listening to everybody, it's great, you know, hear about, you know, what about targeted increases? How can we, you know, make our scale more sophisticated? Talking about, you know, the lack of merit recognition in our teacher scale, and that kind of begs the question, well, shouldn't we be recognizing merit in our teacher scale? And I think the answer is yes, but the fact of the matter is that this scale does not is not about merit. It's just about staying competitive, and it unfortunately has the weakness of not differentiating based on merit. And so I think we fall into a trap if that we say we're going to take resources that could move our 5% higher, that's the resources for administration, and give it to administrators because of merit, because they deserve it, because they did a good job this year. Yes, they did. I'd be all for giving administrators 5% if we gave the teachers 7, 8, 9 something to get us competitive with where the scales of Frederick and Winchester will be next year. But I'm not in favor of saying that one group of employees deserves merit and the other group does not. It dilutes the argument that we've been making year after year after year, which is that we have to stay competitive on our teacher scale, to take resources or to ask for resources and then not put them towards that priority. That's the big challenge I have, and that is the story that I want to be very consistent with, and that I can tell constituents this is what's important and this is why it's being done. And it's not about, I feel someone did a good job. I don't really have any metrics about it. I just have been working with them and I know. If we're going to have merit increases, then I think those merit increases should be based on some sort of measures. And that's great, but I haven't seen that, you know, as something to consider. And I think it should be across the board for all employees, for teachers as well as administrators and other school staff. So I think the big note of caution is that if we say we need a bunch of resources and we are still going to be falling behind the competitors that we've identified, that we're not being consistent with our message and we won't be taken seriously in the future.
I think we just got to acknowledge, too, we're playing in a much more competitive neighborhood of counties than it was a number of years ago. I mean, Loudoun obviously has changed 100% and is I've jokingly referred to them as the New York Yankees of the, but don't sleep on some of the, you know, Warren County has the brand new school that's right down on Happy Creek, Skyline, the rebuilding of Warren County, you know, I mean, they have, and they're getting past now all of the capital expenses they needed to do. And you know, for all the scandals there were last year, you know, the inland port is throwing, and all that IDA land is throwing a lot of money into the coffers of Warren County, and they've so far done it to on capital, you know, capital expenses, building schools and stuff that they had to, but as they get past that, they're gonna be right in there. Frederick County is scheduled, or not scheduled, forecast to be one of the 2 or 3 fastest growing counties in the entire state. And they have built in the last 10 years, I don't know the number of schools, but I drive by new schools in my travels around Frederick County, and it's just a much more competitive neighborhood. That's what's driving these increases. We were always sort of off in the corner before, but I think that the world is coming to us.
Well, so just to interject in this conversation, I really appreciate your points, Mr. Turkel, and it has made me think about things a little bit differently. What I also want to say, though, is that retention of administrators is also important because they're the leaders of our school, and they create the culture, and they have so much to do with the culture and the climate of the school. And so if we have administrators jump ship, then, you know, that also can impact the retention of teachers. So it's all important. I mean, every single job in our school system is important and is worthy of a 5% increase. But I hear what you're saying with it, you know, that the teachers are, that's our largest group that's leaving us.
And it's the group that we've been saying that
Right,
house is
that
burning,
is-
and we need to put
Sure,
out the, you know,
sure,
we need
right.
to keep up. And
Right.
if we take resources and don't put it towards
Right.
that, then
Right.
we're gonna get called out, and we're gonna say, you don't use stuff the way you say
Yes.
is important to you.
But I also would say that, you know, looking at this, and I have looked at this before when I was teaching, you know, teaching with, I don't know, 15 years of experience in Loudoun County with a master's degree, you earn more than the assistant principal at our high school. So why would you, and again, and I've said this before in other conversations, why would you want to stay if you're making less, you're doing more, and your health care costs more? You know, it's because the responsibilities of an assistant principal at a high school are much greater, I think, with that age group that you're dealing with versus teaching special education to 4th graders. And those, you know, we need strong leaders in our schools to create a positive climate and culture. You know, we look at, and I don't want to look at specific positions, but, you know, here in Clarke, some of our administrators who are in the central office, they're doing jobs, what we're requiring them to do is so much greater than what you would do in a larger county where you would, you know, kind of specialize in one area, like eligibility, or I'm thinking special education, but, you know, our director of special services encompasses a lot more without, you know, a team to support that job. So
I think what you're saying is absolutely true. I guess the way I see it is that we have less of a retention problem in the ranks of the
right.
and
Right.
not to be
Right.
reactive. I mean, it's
Right.
great to be proactive, but it feels like we maybe need to stop the bleeding in the
Yeah.
teacher.
Yeah.
You know, that's my current perspective on it.
Mm-hmm.
So Mr. Turkel and even Ms. Ryan, which option are you even looking at?
So, Dr. Bishop, do we have a sense from the county side what they're targeting for a COLA increase for county employees?
Do not.
Okay, so I would say that I think, at this stage of the game, the 5% is the one. I would suggest a target for 3% for administrators, and that the difference between the 3 and 5% of the administrators get moved into the teacher scale to increase that across to 5 point something % in there.
So the other way to look at this is as a pot of money and not a percentage, which is what your point was at the last meeting. So just in a very rough calculation, and this is just assuming that the pot of money is approved by the Board of Supervisors. You could, 3% administration, 6% teachers actually is within $6,000 of being the exact same amount of money. So that's just an example of if you look at it differently, not as a percentage, but as just dollars, then divvying that up. But I do not know what the county is thinking in terms of cost of living for their employees.
Yeah, I wouldn't want it to be less than the county, so I would say 3 or the county, whichever is greater. At this point, that's what I would say.
Once the Board of Supervisors, let's say they approve this ask for 5%, does it then come back to us to kind of redistribute amongst admin, teachers?
Well, you're not really asking for 5%, you're asking for the funds to
A pot of money.
fund a salary
Right.
increase.
Okay,
So if it was to be approved, then you could have that conversation at that time.
So we don't have
We're
to
talking
know.
about, April timeframe.
okay.
If some pot of money less than 5% was approved, then you could consider that.
Okay.
So,
So the discussion about how to allocate it doesn't
So-
necessarily
Doesn't
have
have to be
to
decided
have an
tonight.
answer tonight.
Correct.
Okay, that's what I'm driving at.
that's correct.
Thanks.
Any other
Ready for a
comments
motion?
then, based on that?
What do you need from us, Chuck?
I just need to go
need to
finish
just-
to go through this budget, let you look at the bottom line.
Right, we're in the middle of our presentation.
Yeah, that's okay.
You need to quiet down. I got it.
That's okay.
All right.
So pick up where we left off. So there were two, as there is in most every year, two typical, or the two things that are typically the largest drivers of our budget are the salaries and the health insurance. We continue to work with our health insurance company to try to drive the anticipated increase down. We still don't have a firm number, so we're going to continue to hold that, have that placeholder there. Salaries, it's a 5% increase in the budget as it has been since late January. Quick rehash of the food service fund. Won't read it all to you. It has been adjusted slightly in the presentation, the numbers. We did talk about having a transition of employees. Mr. Catlin and I were talking today about some of the employees, and I know the board had some concern about employees who were reaching retirement age under the Virginia retirement system. If we had employees who left employment and retired, they were eligible to retire, they could collect their VRS and go to work for Sodexo, and there's nothing wrong with that. They could continue to do their same job and collect their VRS benefit. So we might have, we were talking about it today, maybe 1 or 2 employees who might qualify under that scenario. One that we hadn't talked about previously, but I did want to mention that this evening. Benefits of a transition we talked about. Capital Projects Fund. We talked about that. That's gains a lot of attention every year. Our request this year is for $99,000 more. We have identified the projects that we would like to accomplish, although they're in categories now. Worked with Joey Brathwaite and Randy Trineri to identify those projects. The capital revenue is received whether we want it or not through the Virginia Public School Authority bond. There is certain expenditures that money has to be spent on. Just a graphic representation of the county transfer over the last few years. So proposed initiatives, no new personnel requests. We very well will repurpose some positions to support student interventions. Science textbooks and materials across the division were up for an adoption there. Student mental health and academic needs resulting from the pandemic. Standards-based grading initiative. Salaries and benefits for employees. And then overall, every year we're trying to improve efficiencies. So the executive summary that you saw at the last meeting, or the January meeting, had a new county ask. If you look in the bottom block, the school operating fund would have requested, at that time, was a $795,000 increase. And remember that we were working through those personnel numbers, and we thought we had identified some attrition, and that number was going to be just shy of $300,000 overall. So we have worked through our staffing scenarios, and we have a number of positions that we will anticipate reducing next year. They are current vacancies in FY21, receptionist, 5 instructional assistants. These are not currently staffed by anybody, so it's not like it's going to be a riff or somebody's going to lose their job. As a result of the pandemic, these are positions we did not fill. A middle school, high school elective teacher, 1 elementary teacher. We're going to constitute our intensive behavioral support program. We've been working with Chrissy Welgan on that. Our BCBAs are going to be leads there, working with teachers, as opposed to having that individual classroom. Grant-funded tutor was with the Algebra Readiness Initiative. We often found it hard to fill that position anyway, so we're going to handle that a little differently as well. Retirements, we have a high school teacher who is actually already retired, and we'll have an administrative retirement as well. And then again, some continued reorganization of our special education department. We want to build more capacity from within. Our CLM coach, we will continue to be a CLM, competent learner model school division, but we will approach that differently than we have in the past. So the new executive summary. After we've worked through all of these personnel scenarios. Under the expense side, you can see our school operating fund expense is up $894,000. Now that does include almost $1 million worth of additional expense just related to health insurance and salary increase. See our food service fund, debt service fund, both reducing on the expense side. School capital fund, the $99,000 increase that I referenced just a few minutes ago. On the revenue side, I did go back and look at the revenues even this morning and worked with Ms. Bennett to adjust that. So we captured the 2% bonus money that was in the governor's budget. It was to be converted to a 2% salary increase. And we also captured the Senate side of the budget, which was the 3% money, which was $62,600. So just this morning, we made a revenue adjustment of just shy of $150,000. We didn't assume that 5%. We assumed the lower. So the difference, the 2% was about 87,000, and then the 62 was the difference between the 2 and the 3. So that's how we got to the 149. So we did pick that up this morning. Food service, it always is a balanced budget. Our debt service school capital fund, you can see the 154,000 in revenue coming in. That is done on a reimbursement basis. You spend the money and then you request reimbursement. So on the local tax funding side, from 700 and some odd thousand at the last meeting at the end of January, we're at 471,859 of additional county dollars. Now, if the salary increase from the state ends up being 5%, then we'll have a little more revenue. Remember, we already have it reflected on the expense side, or that dollar amount. We would be able to capture a little more revenue from the state if in fact it's 5%, or anything above 3. So that is your new executive summary. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
The proposed increase in local funding comes to what now? Do you know?
On the operating side, it's 471,859. And on the capital side, it's 99, so the total is 570,121. I specifically just mentioned the operating side, though.
Any more comments or questions? Nothing else? So it sounds like after we approve this proposed budget, then present to the Board of Supervisors, and then they approve the dollar amount back to us, then we'll talk about specific percentages.
Do we have a timeline that you expect that the state will make their call?
Budget conferees are together right now.
Yeah.
So I think within, if not this week,
Okay.
pretty soon.
Okay.
And then, of course, the county still has to go through its process. I think Thursday they meet with community agencies. Is that right, Brenda? So they'll start to hear from different folks.
Okay.
Of course, then each department within the county will have its opportunity to talk with the Finance Committee, and from Sheriff Roper all the way down. So sometime in April
Okay.
to early May, we typically have something back from the county.
All right.
Okay, then. May I have a motion?
I move to approve the budget as presented. I move to approve the budget as presented.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Return to school discussion.
So there are 2 documents posted for you this evening in board docs. One of those is a staff-developed document, and the second is the presentation that we were provided last Tuesday by a member of the State Department or the Virginia Department of Education. So I'm going to kind of go back and forth between the two. There are a lot of live links in this document. So in January, the Department of Education, Department of Health, in cooperation with the Department of Ed, introduced a revised reopening plan. Let me get rid of that. There we go. That replaced the phase guidance for Virginia schools, which was issued by the Commonwealth last spring. We did also meet with our teacher. I met with the teacher focus group back a few weeks ago, reported that out to you at the work session in February. So on February 10th, the CDC guidance regarding quarantine, because we had previously reported to you that the quarantine requirement still existed even if a person had received the vaccine. This was just updated now just slightly over a week ago. So vaccinated persons with exposure to someone with suspected or confirmed COVID-19 are not required to quarantine if they meet all of the following criteria: fully vaccinated, 2 weeks out. So this coming Friday would be 2 weeks for our employees who were vaccinated in our clinic last week. Are within 3 months following receipt of the last dose. So we would be basically until mid-May. Have remained asymptomatic since the COVID-19 exposure. And if you do not meet all 3 of those criteria, you should continue to follow the quarantine guidance after exposure. So on the 12th, the CDC released updated guidance for schools. That revised guidance does not significantly change previous guidelines, other than a few exceptions that were outlined in the PowerPoint provided by the Department of Education. So I'm going to switch over to that really quick here. So the next step in this process is, and I spoke to Dr. Green today during a conference call, and he indicated that last week that he received a draft document from the DOE and Health Department had been working together, and they had a draft document. They were asked for comment, and then he sent his comments back in on what the new proposal will be. It's my understanding that during tomorrow's conference call with the state superintendent that we will get an update on where that document stands, and may also very well have a representative from the American Academy of Pediatrics participate in the call as well. I heard that just this afternoon. And we know that AAP has said 3 feet of distance with a mask is sufficient. So you've had an opportunity to take a look at this. I won't read it to you. There is a link there about the science brief on transmission in K-12 schools. One of the things that has been repeatedly mentioned, and I've said it here as well during our meetings, is that cases that are being seen in the community are not being reflected in schools. And Dr. Green even reiterated today again during our conference call this afternoon that schools remain some of the safest places in our communities because of the mitigation strategies that we have in place. So 3 essential elements: layered mitigation, universal masking, physical distancing, hand hygiene, etc. Risk of community transmission. This was one of the changes in the CDC guidance. We went from 5 levels to 4, and from a 2-week time frame to 7 days. One of the frustrations that I shared with Dr. Green this afternoon was that if you, and I spend a lot of time on the VDH website every day, or nearly every day, some statistical data is reported in 14-day increments and others in 7. And he said that he has actually brought that up too. Let's have some more consistency about 14 versus 7. Pick one or the other. Now I'm assuming they'll look at 7 since the CDC has suggested that. But that is hard to follow. Because if you look at a 14-day rate of incidents per 100,000 versus a 7-day, it could be very different. And then there are averages that are built into that website as well. 7-day rolling averages. So it can be confusing. So phased learning modes, we have committed our plan, our return to school plan does commit to a virtual environment for the remainder of this year at a minimum to our students who have chosen that option and to our families who continue to desire that option. Dependent upon community transmission levels, it addresses elementary, middle, and high school. And then academics over athletics. There have been some school divisions in the Commonwealth that have chosen to participate in athletics while their students have remained 100% virtual, and that hasn't been very well accepted. So those 4 levels, from low transmission to high transmission, so total new cases per 100,000 persons in the past 7 days, percentage of positive tests in the last 7 days are the two big ones. So then we finally have, and there's been lots of conversation among this group about a metric. And is there a metric? Finally, here we are nearly a year later, and this is at least the beginnings of a metric, but it's pretty strict. So you can see for low transmission under the blue, so as an example in that second larger block, K-12 schools open for full in-person instruction, physical distancing of 6 feet or more to the greatest extent possible for low transmission or moderate transmission. If you go over to substantial or high transmission, it says 6 feet of distance required, and then it also speaks to virtual environments as well. And then it addresses the sports and extracurricular activities toward the bottom of the page. Our coaches, you've heard me sing the praises of our coaches, our parents, and our athletes over the last couple of meetings. That went incredibly well for the winter season. Fall season is well underway. We have cross country and football and golf going on right now, and sideline cheer, and that continues to go well. Testing and vaccines. I'll get to some specific data on Clarke in just a few minutes. So hopefully tomorrow there'll be more that I can share with you, but that was the basis of the conversation last Tuesday. So multiple reports have continued to indicate recently that COVID is likely to become an endemic and may likely mean a yearly vaccine, and much like the one that's available for influenza. And multiple research studies continue to show that transmission in schools has not mirrored community infection rates. So I sent Dr. Green a series of questions from our last meeting. Mr. Turkel had some specific questions, and I threw a few of my own in, and he responded back in several days. So the case incidence rates in the Lord Fairfax Health District have continued to fall over the last couple of weeks. He did say there will always be some incremental risk in having children come closer together. But several private schools in our area have successfully used a similar model to the one proposed here in Clarke. Dropping to 3 feet of distance places that one mitigation strategy into a higher risk category, but other strategies could be maintained fairly easily. It goes further. Even though all virtual is listed as a minimum risk, it really isn't, since students are out in the community where there's much more disease than is found in schools. We've had a number of students participate in rec league basketball this winter. Talked to Joey Brathwaite today. He said that's gone incredibly well also. Then community school metrics. No scales were set several months ago. Numerous school systems, including Clarke County, have remained open successfully without outbreaks despite the red metrics. He spoke specifically today to that period of time between the Thanksgiving holiday and the Christmas holiday, where our area really saw a significant spike in cases. And said if you could stay open then, there's no reason that you can't be open now and begin to consider having additional students in the building.
That was Dr. Green that said that?
Yes. That was during one of our weekly conference calls with Valley Health officials, local superintendents, lead nurse for the health department was involved. Lord Fairfax Health District will continue to assist our school system in every way possible, including vaccination and mitigation, and the goal is to keep the metric green. Vaccines, I specifically asked him about the vaccine's effect on any variant virus, and he said it's not clear at this time, but it is possible that increased contagion will drive up community cases, but increasing vaccination will likely have the opposite effect. Orderly following of rules and precautions in schools will likely continue to make them safer environments than in the community. As of the 16th of February, there are 19 school districts in the Commonwealth that have 4+ days of instruction. They're in purple. Many of those are in Southwest Virginia, which was most recently hit hardest by the pandemic.
But if you look at the pandemic metrics, school, I can't remember the exact pathway on how I get there, but those purple districts are turning orange and green. They're seeing a drop.
Yes. I know there is a 20th one that's not added there yet. Warren County voted last Tuesday. Their elementary students have been in school 4 days a week since the beginning of the year. They voted last Tuesday. I talked to Chris on Thursday or Friday, the superintendent over there, and his middle and high schoolers are going to go back 4 days a week mid-March. So the current metrics, boy, there are a lot of them that you can look at. We have looked a lot at the CDC school metrics. Let me scroll down here a little bit. All right, get it to load. All right, I need to pick Clarke from that list. Is that it? Thank you. It's hard for me to see that far. So we currently are sitting in the red in the cases per 100,000 over the last 14 days. We also are sitting in that deeper orange in terms of the positivity rate over the last 14 days. But again, remember that the CDC now says 7 days. So if you go down to this map, you can see the 14-day incidence rate. I'm on Frederick, there's Clarke. If you change this to, is that the positivity rate?
No. The second one is 14-day % positivity.
All right, there's a 7-day one there. That case incidence?
7-day case incidence
Okay.
% change.
Thank you. Clarke is in the green. If you go to the next one down, still in the green. So that's one set of metrics. So let me go back. All right, come on. All right, there we go. So if we look at the daily locality metrics, so you have this 7-day case incidence. We're in that blue.
Blue's not even a color on the scale.
Right.
There's
Well,
not
it's a different,
there's not
it's a
a
different
key.
scale. This is a different, and this is why this is so difficult to follow, when you really have to kind of go to multiple parts of the website. I think I selected Clarke there. If it's going to load for me. There we go. So a positivity rate of 5.4%. Case incidence rate, that's per 100,000 of 14.8, correct? So a different set of metrics. 7 days, some of them averages versus 14 days. So Ms. Ryan and I had a little back and forth today by email about the data I was looking at versus what she was looking at. So it can be confusing.
Well, and then there's even a different route that I've been going through
Yes.
than those two that you've just shared, which I go to the COVID-19 data, then locality.
I'm going to follow you through
Mine's
that.
still not, it's kind of
It's
taking a
actually
minute.
under the, I think it's this one. Nope, wrong one.
Okay.
So daily dashboard. It's that one. So you can
Yes,
choose
so
locality.
then I go to locality, and then I go to, I pick Clarke.
That one.
Mm-hmm.
Come on. This may help me out. Right there.
And so then the 7-day average,
It's 14.8.
right, which is in the yellow, according to that.
It's
Correct.
different though. This is what Dr. Bishop and I talked about earlier, so that the average is not the number we're supposed to look at. It's supposed to be the total over the course of 7 days.
So where is that?
It's not on here.
Right.
You have to,
Well,
you have to
if
get
the
it from,
7-day average is
the
14.8, then do you multiply 14.8 by 7
By
to get the
7.
number? Yeah.
Yes.
yes. So you can get it from the CDC website.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The CDC COVID tracker has that data.
But it drags 3 days behind.
It was last updated on Friday the 19th, so today it wasn't up to date. But they show 7-day interval for
Gotcha.
percent positivity and
Which
in
could
total, which is
fluctuate.
what we're supposed to look at.
Right.
They show both of them right next to each other on CDC, but not on VDH.
So I'm hopeful that the next iteration of the VDH website will be something that is maybe more in concert with what's out there on the other side. So we have continued to work on a reopening plan for this year. Transportation, our transportation staff has been working to shift and revise bus routes to reduce or balance the number of students on buses. Based on our work through today, we would have one bus with 30 students. On that bus, there are 7 sets of siblings, so 14 of the 30 are siblings and would be asked to share a seat. That's what we're currently doing now. Even though there are fewer students on the bus, siblings would sit in the same seat. Our middle and high school students who live within the town of Berryville would continue to have parent transportation or walk to school. On the instruction side, we still would have full-time virtual teachers at the elementary level and those who are designated to teach in-person learners. Blue and orange hybrid would be joined and combined and attend Monday through Thursday. Friday, we would still have that planning day, small group work, teacher small group work with students. Maximum class size in each building has not changed with one exception. The last time you looked at this, Cooley was at 19 students in 4th grade to have a class of 20. Johnson Williams, those 33 students in the high school, 23. So schools are currently evaluating the number of students in a particular class and may make adjustments as necessary. As an example, I talked to Ms. Waring about a few larger classes. And she's looking at transitioning students to a larger classroom, let's say maybe a science lab, that is not being used during a particular period so that those 23 students can spread out. There are situations where we will be able to maintain 6 feet of distance in some classrooms. There will be others where we're between 3 and 4 feet. Just based on the age of the building, based on the size of the room. Even at Cooley as an example, the new addition to Cooley, those kindergarten and 1st grade rooms are much larger than the rooms in the other part of the building. So we will be able to maintain 6 feet of distance in some classrooms, but in others it would be 3 to 4 feet. Mr. Trineri is working, we're actually going out on Friday Today he was working on it too. We're going out on Friday to actually set some classrooms up. He's going to Boyce tomorrow to meet with Ms. Egbert and take a look at several of the classrooms over there. We would still continue to offer the concurrent classes, middle and high school teachers teaching both online and in-person students. We had some conversation about a survey last time we were here. Gave that some thought, and what I would like to do is once a decision is announced, if it's announced that we're going to move to a 4-day-a-week schedule, to reach out to those hybrid families and say, are you comfortable with that? And if you're not, let's get in touch with your school so that you can transition to that virtual environment. Give them the option. We talked about that. I think that we will have a few students who probably go to the virtual environment. Parents might have been comfortable with 2 days, they're not with 4. Fully virtual students, and I know you received an email today from a parent, or we received an email today from a parent who suggested that fully virtual students be given an opportunity to transition back to 2 days a week before we look at moving hybrid students, current hybrid students, to 4 days a week. Health and safety. All of our current screening protocols would remain in place, although the CDC for a number of months has not recommended or not encouraged mass screenings. The primary change in the plan is that 6 feet of social distance or physical distancing to 3 feet with a mask would be commonplace in many classrooms. And I just want everybody to know that right up front. 6 feet of distance from the beginning would not have required a mask, but it was agreed upon in conversation among the 5 of you, with recommendations from staff also, that 6 feet of distance, all students would wear a mask regardless at the start of the year. As of the 19th, 257 out of our 378 eligible employees have had at least the first dose of vaccine.
That's a big change from before.
243 have had both doses from our clinic. I know of one employee today who was going to Shenandoah University for his second dose. He was not available to be vaccinated at our clinic at the high school. He went today. We have a number of other folks who have gone to other clinics that we've worked to set up who are in various stages of receiving that second dose. We have to rely on employees to self-report whether or not they've had a dose, both doses, they don't want any, or they're still interested. We've had a number of folks who have not responded to our questionnaire, but we have the data that we have. So I mentioned before our eligible employees were full part-time folks, substitutes, paraprofessional coaches. We have arranged 3 clinics for our folks to have an opportunity to participate in. We are sitting right at about a 68% vaccination rate. We do have 23 people who indicated no desire to, out of those who responded to the survey, at least, that indicated no desire to take the vaccine. And we have 17 now that have indicated an interest in receiving it but haven't yet started. That number, the last time we talked about it, was 23. So we have a few more that have started the process. And then maintenance and operations is currently in the process of looking at reloading classrooms. We will have some classrooms where there will be enough desks in there currently that they won't even have to bring in any furniture. Food service, I mentioned the last time that they need 2 weeks to prepare for ordering. Need to finalize cafeteria arrangements in each building. Those initial plans are provided below. Meals would continue to be served free of charge and provided for pickup each week. So in terms of cafeteria management, boys pre-K and 5th grade will remain in the cafeteria for meals at 6 feet of distance. Kindergarten will continue to eat in the classroom, but once class rosters are confirmed, adjustments might be required. All other grades will eat in the gym with an altered schedule for PE. So obviously on nice days, nice weather days, when Mr. Marquardt can take the students out for physical education, they could go outside. The cafeteria or the gymnasium can be set up as a makeshift cafeteria. Cooley, they have 52 student desks in the cafeteria currently, and those are 6 feet apart. Cafeteria will be fully utilized each day, while some smaller classes will continue to have meals in their classroom. For classrooms that are transitioning to the cafeteria for meals, the IA that has been charged with facilitating the lunch so the teacher can have an unencumbered lunch will go with that class to the cafeteria. And with the custodial staff at the end of the lunch period, we'll make sure that the desks are wiped down and that it's ready, that space is ready to receive the next student as they come in. The middle school, they were working today with Mr. Terneri. They're considering options for student meals. As an example, they eat lunch by grade level. I think there are 87 sixth graders currently in a hybrid model. They have like 92 desks in the cafeteria. So no change there, they're 6 feet apart. But they'll make adjustments based on, again, once rosters are confirmed. The high school can accommodate their students in 3 lunch shifts. We do have a number of students who, the largest lunch shift would be 148 students. A number of those seniors, though, do have an early release. And Mrs. Waring is offering cafeteria, the interior and exterior senior courtyards, the main corridor that goes down by the gymnasium, by the auditorium, that space, outside near the bus loop when weather permits, and also for the exterior courtyard.
Does she have enough staffing to
It'll be a challenge, but they'll make it work. I mean, they're committed to getting kids back into school, but staffing is a challenge.
and
Because
the
you
more
want
you
the
spread
teachers,
them out?
right? You want teachers to have an unencumbered lunch, and if you're going to allow the kids to spread out, staffing will be a challenge, or supervision will be a challenge.
So is that, when you say that they can be accommodated at the high school 3 lunch shift, that's with 6 feet
Yes.
of distancing? Okay.
Yes. And basically using every inch of available space. So the proposed reentry plan, March 15th. Well, let me say this before I get into the specifics. Since early in the year, we have worked individually with families as students have had difficulties for a variety of reasons and allowed students to come back into a hybrid environment. We have some fully virtual students who have come back. They might have special needs. They might be an English language learner. But we've been doing that since very early in the school year in all 4 buildings. We recently had a conversation, Mr. Catlett was involved in the high school with some of our seniors who are in danger of not graduating because of their failure to engage, or maybe they can't engage because they don't have internet at home. So we're bringing those students back. All last week, the high school administration and guidance department held individual meetings with parents and students to kind of map out a plan to get them to the finish line. So the only thing that's different about this is it's more of a mass reentry because we've been doing it all along as the need arises. So March 15th, students identified as receiving special education services and English language learners will begin to attend 4 days per week. So the numbers below, just so everybody that's listening and everybody in the room understands what those mean. So Boyce has 40 SPED and ELL students. They're split evenly, 20 on orange days and 20 on blue days. So on that blue day Monday, that means that they're going to have 20 additional orange day students that attend that day. Certainly very doable. Cooley has 53 students who are identified special education or as an English language learner, not split evenly. So on blue days, where they typically have 22 identified students, 31 additional identified students would come on blue day, and then of course the other 22 would come on orange days to get to 4 days a week. 47 students at the middle school, 54 at the high school. And generally they're split almost evenly. April 5th, students, which is the Monday after spring break. Students in K-6 will begin to attend 4 days per week. Our 87 sixth graders have been at Johnson-Williams 2 days a week. Our 87 hybrid sixth graders have been at Johnson-Williams 2 days a week. My thought is to get them in the building, let them get acclimated without other classes being there. We know that they lost a chunk of their 5th grade year last year, that found one of those foundational elementary school years. So let's go ahead and bring our 6th graders in and introduce them into the building that week after spring break. The following week, students in 7-12 would join their peers and begin to attend 4 days a week. Again, many classrooms will have less than 6 feet of distance. Cafeterias, we feel very comfortable. Eating arrangements, we feel comfortable about. Transportation, we feel comfortable about. So it's a matter of, we asked you early on to trust us and let us get our middle and high school students back into school. We're asking you again to trust us and let us transition our students back. Basically, we're talking about 4th quarter for the most part. I think our kids and our families and our staff have demonstrated that we can do this, and we'd like to move forward.
Comments, questions for Dr. Bishop? Mr. Schutte,
Mine are brief. I got
do you have a mic
number
on,
of phone
Mr.
calls
Do you have,
and-
is your mic hot?
Oh, my mic is hot. I got a number of calls this week, and every call I got was in favor of reopening. And I'm going to trust Dr. Bishop because I always do. And if he says he can pull it off, I'm going to trust him. So just want to make sure that the people who choose to be virtual still have that choice. I'm perfectly fine with the solution so long as everybody's got that choice. My one question is, what do we do if more people come back than we can handle with spacing?
Well, now, see, that's the thing. I mean, we're going to have some people who might want to come back, and as long as we have to maintain this recommended 3 feet of distance, it's going to be nearly impossible.
Yeah. I don't know what to do then. I don't think that's going to happen, but if it did,
Yeah.
that would be an issue.
The virtual environment has worked for some students.
Yeah. That's it. That's all I had.
I'll go. Okay, so I am really pleased to see the phased reentry prioritizing SPED and English language learners. I think that's, and then after that, our youngest learners. I think that's, spot on with who needs to be in the building the most. I was also really happy to see the VDOE document and the CDC guidelines give us the most specific, clear metrics to follow yet. We've been wanting this for a year, and they're finally giving us very clear thresholds and what to do with them. So previously we've been in the red, and we're like, what do we do with this? And they're like, consider it. So now they're telling us what to do with it, right? Consider it. So I think that's really helpful to have that. I hope that we continue to trend in a good direction here, and that by the time March 15th comes around, and then April 5th and April 12th, we're in the green or the yellow on all of those metrics, and we can just go ahead. What I would like to see, I think, as we step into this, would be that that we strictly follow those metrics as we choose to enter each phase of reopening. So I know that they mention in those metrics, if you're already open, that's one thing. If you're choosing to reopen, you need to take these actions. And the language is really, really specific. So when I was going through it today, and when you and I emailed Dr. Bishop, I looked at our percent positivity, 5.4% on the VDH website, and then I looked at the only place I could get our 7-day case total, which is what they tell us to look at, not the average, but the total, which was on the CDC website. It's 3 days old, and it was 109. And that puts us in the red. So our percent positivity puts us in the yellow, and our case incidence per 100,000 puts us in the red. And the CDC website, so those tables, after we spoke, I went back to the CDC guidelines, and those are actually just screen grabs from the CDC guidelines. They're verbatim, which I'm sure you already knew. And so they say when they're in different categories of risk, you take the actions that are recommended in the higher risk category. So if one is red, they're all red, as far as how it should guide your actions. They also have some very unequivocal language about masking in this newest iteration. So there's no more recommendation. It is required to wear a mask in all settings, all persons, at all times, whether you're in an office, a school bus, a gymnasium, wherever. So they no longer make that distinction between 6 feet is okay without a mask. It's masking for everyone all the time, every situation, every location, which is great. But I think that gives us a little bit, I have heard the AAP's 3-foot recommendation, but the CDC and VDH doesn't direct us to follow the AAP guidelines. And so I hope it's a moot point that we keep trending in the right direction, but I would like to see our reopening phases strictly tied to those metrics. They are finally telling us, these are the metrics, these are the actions you are required to take. And I don't want to, we made a decision as a board to follow public health experts over the summer. And for me personally, that meant I had to, vote in a way that I didn't feel comfortable. But I did it because our public health expert was telling us it was the right thing to do. And now I am concerned at flexing on those mitigation strategies when there doesn't seem to be space in the new guidelines for flexing. So prior to these new guidelines, I was more like, yeah, teachers are vaccinated. This is voluntary. Let's go. But now I see these new guidelines, and that kind of throws a wrench in it, and from my perspective. And it would feel to me a little bit like we were kind of deciding as we go forward that we're going to make a split from the public health guidelines and kind of go our own way.
My only response to that would be that we've remained in school and we've been in the red. Now, absent guidelines, clear guidelines, but we've been able to do it safely. And I understand, and of course, small numbers in a small community like ours, small numbers can, it can be a 200% increase in one day, and it might be 2 people. So that's, as people start to say, well, hold on a minute, we were in the red 2 months ago, and now we're in the red and we're closing or going fully virtual. We've been able to operate. That would be my only response to that concern.
And I think what we've done so far has been, really successful. And I think that the major difference here is that we're removing that distancing that has potentially allowed us to be successful. We're also adding in, and it does say, consider vaccines as another layered mitigation strategy. And so if, you know, if we're considering this and if public health experts would tell us to consider that like a one-for-one swap, where teachers are vaccinated, so if you're pulling the 6 feet of distancing, but you're adding this layer and they're equivalent, then okay. But right now they say 5 key mitigation strategies, the two most important being masking and distancing. And so if we're pulling distancing, but we're adding in vaccination, I am not a public health expert, so I'm not sure how to weigh those variables, but just based on what they're saying, they don't list vaccination as a key mitigation strategy, probably because it's not available to everyone yet, and they can't list it because it would be impossible. I don't know. So those are my reservations. They're really from the new CDC guidelines, which kind of turned everything upside down for me over the weekend.
So just on your line of thought, in terms of following health experts and what we've been doing and what we would potentially be changing, I would say, is it fair to say that the one consistent thing that we've been following is VDH, our local VDH, whether before or now, as we, you know, consider this move forward? I mean, I would say that we still are, and that what I went through at the beginning when I realized there was no nice grid for us is that there was actually an advantage to the nuanced and more personalized guidance that we got from from our Lord Fairfax Health District versus the strict metric that was a lot less considerate of things like what you just said, you know, the circumstances of vaccination or other elements like what Dr. Bishop has said, which is that we have community metrics, we have school metrics, and the two haven't been correlating. So how valuable are those in our decision making? You know,
Yeah,
so
I agree, but they're not telling us to evaluate in-school transmission metrics either. So I think that's correct. I don't want to make that determination that we should consider pieces of data that are not a part of the CDC guidance or the VDH guidance.
yeah, and I get that, and I think that's something we have to come to terms with. I think for me, you know, in looking at this and taking in that consideration that we haven't seen the schools mirror the community, the two that they highlight are social distancing and masking. And so really that's been our in-school program along with cleaning. And so for me, what's important moving forward is I'm encouraged by the look to shuffling larger classrooms, and I know my family in different parts of the country that are, you know, in school or have kids in school, you know, that's what they do for dealing with larger classes and getting people in and still maintaining distance. They were doing 6 feet, and I recognize to the greatest extent possible means less than 6 feet, so it gave us that opening. The one thing I would want to have clear set boundaries on is that there will not be less than 3 feet in any classroom, and that there will not be less than 6 feet in any lunch scenario, because the lunch scenario is where the masks are off. So that would be you know, some hard and fast things that I would advocate for. Yeah, I mean, you know, hopefully our metrics keep heading in the right direction, because that's the best thing for us in so many ways. And I think the only other question I would have is practically, not with metrics in mind, but practically, why can't we get in school earlier than the 5th and the 12th?
We were just thinking about that spring break. I mean, so the 15th, we would have 1 week after the 15th, and then that next week is spring break week. In terms of setting up classrooms and making sure that we're ready, we thought a phased approach to doing that. we're taking up, like all the stickers in the rooms that have been where the legs of the desks sit, those are coming up. We're replacing those. Could have some situations where furniture has to be moved. So, and we have 3 people to do it when we can pull 3. So it's staffing.
Okay, that's satisfactory to me, thank you. I think that's it for me.
So I have had a number of people reach out regarding concerns going back to, or moving towards 4 days a week. And I think one of those families may make the decision to switch over to virtual. So that's something that we've talked about, that we may see happening. Some families just may not be comfortable with, the additional number of students. I'm in favor of moving towards 4 days a week. I think that while it's contradictory to what the CDC is telling us in some cases, regarding the 6 feet, I think that we've done really well thus far, and I can't say that I see more of a risk with trying to go to 4 days a week, knowing that our teachers have had and staff members have had the opportunity to have the vaccine, and we're waiting plenty of time for the vaccine to kick in for those teachers and staff members. That makes me feel a lot more comfortable about sending our children back 4 days a week. I do hope that we can accommodate those families who have had a change in plan with their family, so to speak, that have said we want to be virtual, but because of certain circumstances, we'd like to be considered hybrid, or for the hybrid spots. And I know that it may be a challenge to accommodate all of those families. But I think that our school system has done the best that we possibly can in trying to meet the needs of families who have reached out. So, and just from what we've seen with athletics, I mean, whoever would have thought that wrestling would have worked out the way that it has, as well as basketball and, other sports. I think we were all very concerned about that. And, so I'm trusting that our children and our teachers and the staff members are going to implement the plan that you guys have, that Dr. Bishop and Mr. Catlett and everyone else has worked so hard on to share with us. So.
Okay, I just want to, Dr. Bishop referred to an email that we received today, and I think one we received over the weekend, so I just feel like I just want to bring it up since I haven't really discussed it with any of you, but the email we received today was regarding a virtual family who now feels comfortable going into school because of vaccines, and obviously things are different than where they were a few months ago. And I think the suggestion was, can we have more kids come into school for the 2 days as opposed to kind of bringing everybody in for the 4 days? So still stick to orange and blue, but have more kids who might be interested in the orange or in the blue to come in. While I understand that and in some ways do sort of agree with it, I also feel at the same time that getting our kids in 4 days a week is will be a huge milestone, and you know, what's the word I'm looking for? I just feel like, this is gonna sound weird. I feel like in some ways we'll be doing a disservice by not doing this, moving forward with 4 days a week. And I feel like that's almost hypocritical, because I don't want to sound like people might not feel that way who have virtual learners as well, because I'm sure there are some who feel like we're doing a disservice to them as well. So anyway, I wanted to get feedback. Any feedback about that? Go ahead, Mr. Turkel.
Yeah, I mean, it's like what Mr. Hobart said, is that, I mean, I have been impressed with the accommodations that the system has made throughout the year. And I know that at the beginning of the year, there was upset parents saying, I chose one thing and now, I had totally different circumstances. And it's the same story now, but I know that by and large, they were mostly all accommodated, and that's terrific. And so I certainly would want to continue that. I think if we can get our heads into this idea of 3 feet and 6 feet, then we have the opportunity not to say no, but to say we have capacity up to 3 feet, and that becomes the new hard wall. And then we have to start, disappointing folks. But I think perhaps there may be the opportunity to actually allow folks to come in, and I might suggest that maybe an email goes out to everybody saying, hey, please let us know your preferences coming up, if we do go to this, just so that we can see some things, and maybe even integrate some of these folks in sooner, even in the 2-day-a-week schedule, that are virtual, if they want to shift back into classroom, and they can start transitioning right away. If there's no reason not to, if we decide on new boundaries for distance, and we can accommodate them, then I'm all for it.
I guess too, the email, I'm just thinking, the email, I guess was an assumption that if you're virtual, then you absolutely can't switch to hybrid. And in some ways that's the case, but that doesn't mean we're not going to be working with families, to Mr. Turkel's point. So, so is your plan to send out to everybody, or
So the first,
you were thinking of hybrid families?
one of the first things that we're going to do is send an email to hybrid families,
Yeah.
because we want to find out, well, Mr. Trineri is working through the capacity in each classroom, and school principals, capacity in each classroom at 3 feet.
Mhm.
I said 3 to 4 feet. So that's kind of step one. We have to figure out what that capacity is, because in room 200 might be different than room 202. So we have to work through all of that. Then we need to find out from our hybrid folks whether or not they intend to come to school 4 days a week, or no, we're not comfortable with that, so we'll just choose virtual for the remainder of the year. So when we have capacity, we know how many hybrid people are coming back, or coming 4 days a week, then we can start to say, okay, we can now take on more people. I mean, just like we're talking about a phased reentry for different age groups, we also just asking for some grace to allow us to have a phased reentry for people from hybrid or virtual to hybrid, or vice versa. I mean, this takes some time to put together.
I think we've got to limit not meaning to cut you off, but I think they've told us what they can do, and they've studied the problem. I think the more permutations you put in there, it becomes more and more of a complicated management problem. I just think, let's take it a step at a time.
Yeah, no, again, I brought it up because we got the email today, and it sounds like, I mean, your approach is the right one, right? We have to check with hybrid families. Do you plan to stay? Figure that out. Well, we have to see what rooms how many people we can accommodate at 3 feet. Then we'll work with hybrid families, and then virtual families. So, yeah, okay.
And I do think we also still have, the Cooley building that's not in use.
Upper.
Right? And maybe if we're really in a bind, looking at using that school for a couple elementary classes. I don't know. That's not our job to figure out and to tell you what to do. But, it's nice to have that facility available if we need it.
Yes.
So,
Okay, then the other email was just, again, the concern, which I think we've always had about, now that we're adding 4 days a week for all our hybrid students, just this concern about making sure the virtual kids aren't left behind. So, and you know, the schedule that he gave us with his elementary student, who sounds like is in the PM, I think it was the PM synchronous learning. So, you know, just obviously, again, I think it's just heightened sense of awareness as we've always had. Whether folks think we've been successful or not, I mean, I'm not sure there's, I guess I'm not sure we can solve that, right? But again, I just wanted to, if anyone had comments about it, I just felt like I needed to bring it up during the meeting. If you don't, that's okay too, but.
You know, I sent out an email back, I don't know, a month or 6 weeks ago, 2 months ago maybe, that was positive, you know, to different folks, and I received some criticism for a positive email to people. But I can tell you that for a division this size, with the limitations that we have in our community with lack of internet and even in some situations where a hotspot won't work, we have been as successful as most, or more successful than most, in being able to pull this off. And it's not because of anything that I've done. It's because we have committed teachers in our classrooms, and we have administrators who are doing a good job of trying to make sure that they want to make it as equitable as possible. If we could flip the switch and we could have every student back in school tomorrow, I would be screaming from the top of the mountain. We still have limitations in place that we need to follow. Not that we have to follow, we need to follow in order to help keep this thing at bay. As we all get more comfortable in dealing with this, as vaccine becomes more readily available, then we're going to be in a much different place. That's why you've not heard us talking about this kind of situation moving into 21-22. I mean, we're hoping on August 31st that we have 1,713 students walk through our the doors at our 4 schools. So we have handled this as well, any division that I know of. It hasn't been perfect, but it hasn't been because of lack of effort either. But we've been able to pull it off relatively well.
I think we're all in agreement of that. And you just mentioned the 21-22 school calendar. I think I saw on social media somewhere where there still seems to be confusion on whether that's a hybrid virtual model or what it is. So just to make clear to everybody, that is 100% in school.
5 days a week.
5 days a week. Something might change, but our plan is 21-22 school year we're sort of back to quote unquote normal. So just wanted to bring that up. Okay, so I was just I'm thinking about what Ms. Ryan talked about for these metrics and wanting to be watching those as we get closer to reopening. So March 15th, March 15th, we have, okay, so March 8th, we have a work session.
No,
Did we
Canceled.
canceled that,
because
didn't
we had the
we?
Board of Supervisors meeting that night.
Okay, so if needed, we could try to schedule a special meeting if there was concern about us bringing kids back March 15th. And then we have April 5th and April 12th, which is around, obviously, spring break, and then we have our regular school board meeting on March 22nd. So those could be 2 times where we have a touch point about the metrics, if we need to. Otherwise, it sounds like all of us are in favor with moving ahead with the schedule for reopen. I did not see that we needed to take action on this, on the agenda, but I feel like we do.
You think
But-
we do? Okay.
Is that right, Dr. Bishop?
Yes.
Or- Yeah, okay.
So can I just circle back to, I know I'm probably pushing harder than the rest of the board, but, and I know that we have those possible meetings in March to revisit this, but I'm not comfortable tonight flipping kind of the on switch for this for April 5th and 12th without making sure that we are tied to some, you know what I mean? I don't want to decide now and then it's like full steam ahead, we're already going and we can't stop.
I think we're still under the umbrella of a public health expert with the feedback we received from Dr. Green. That this plan, as proposed and reviewed by Dr. Green, is acceptable.
Did Dr. Green review this plan?
I've talked with him about it.
Okay. I mean, respectfully, Dr. Green's
He's our God.
comments have been open to multiple interpretations on just about everything. So I feel like we could shoehorn almost anything into the acceptable range of, you know what I mean? They've been ambiguous on more than one occasion, and so
But I think in order for this to work.
we have something clear,
Right.
and we're
I-
going to ignore it, is what it feels like to me.
But I think regarding your point about like not moving full steam ahead, it seems like we have to be moving forward in order to make the plans and accommodations necessary to be ready on April 5th and April 12th,
Yes.
especially for those, those larger classes that we're going to have to measure classroom size and, make those accommodations. So
I totally agree. I think what I'm asking for, I guess now that I think about it, is just like some additional, language that says, I don't know exactly how to say it, but,
but if things get really
if
bad,
our health metrics
things
support
change,
it. I am
sure,
in support of this
sure.
plan if our health metrics support it. I think it's a fantastic plan. I want this to happen. This isn't about how I feel about school. It's not that I'm not in
Right.
favor of returning to school. So I wouldn't, I don't want to vote no on this plan. I just want to know that there is a rider on this vote that says if health metrics support the prudence of implementing this plan or something like that. I don't just want to say, yes, let's go ahead with this plan, and that's what it feels like, the kind of clean yes or no vote. So that's what I'm struggling with.
Well, I think though, right at the beginning of the year when we were making this decision, we obviously moved to hybrid, right? And then went back to virtual, and then we said, okay, I think we're ready for hybrid. And I think all those times we did talk about, if metrics go sideways, right? I don't want to put it this way, but when you're talking about your rider, like it's at our discretion to then figure out, regroup and how we want to move forward. So for me, I just feel like that's assumed.
And also,
I don't, it didn't feel that way to me because of where we currently are and as far as our metrics go. It doesn't seem like we are watching that.
Well, the reality is that our metrics haven't supported us being in school almost from the beginning.
exactly, we were bright red the day we opened.
And we have quarantined, between Thanksgiving and Christmas break, we had 5 classrooms at one time quarantined, which is what our plan said we would do. We would handle it by student, by classroom, and we followed that to the T, which is what it was suggested we do by our local health professionals, our local public health professional. So that doesn't change. I I mean, tomorrow, our numbers right now in the school division are lower than they've been for some time. Knock on wood. That might change tomorrow. But if we have a situation that flares up by the end of the week and we have to close, we'll close. But we've operated in the red almost from the beginning, I guess is where I'm having a difficult time. Because again, these community metrics, and a reasonable person would say, well, if there's more community transmission or more COVID in the community, kids are more, they're around it more. They're more likely to maybe get it or come into contact with it. But we've been able to operate successfully, even under those circumstances. That's where I land on it. You know, we've been. It's not been easy for anybody, but we've been able to manage it.
Yeah, and I feel a little more at ease moving forward because of the vaccination program with the teachers. I mean, really at the beginning, that was the biggest hurdle I had to overcome was, you know, we had all the numbers on the risk of you know, severe complications by age, and our teachers were right in there, and that was troubling. And so we focused hard and heavy on the mitigation strategies, masking and distance specifically. Now we can pull back and operate on a different risk profile of the vulnerable, which is the student population, and that risk profile is significantly lower. So taking it as we have on the guidance of the local health department, I wouldn't recommend stepping out on our own, but I don't feel through the understanding that I have that we're doing that. So for me, I'm a little more comfortable with moving forward without hard and fast metrics.
So I'm in favor of the reentry of students with special needs and English language learners around March 15th. I'm a little bit concerned about other kids knowing. Yeah, like, is there a risk of I'm starting to get tired. Is there a risk of you know, that, oh gosh, words
Well,
escaping me, of other children knowing, well, hey, you're here 4 days a week, but I thought you were supposed to be, you know, like, oh, he's a blue student or a blue kid day. Why is he here on my orange day?
Well,
So that's,
is there a chance? Yes.
yeah,
But
right.
we've also had students re-enter individually or in smaller
okay.
groups or by family or 20 seniors who, some of whom might be identified special education already. So
Okay, and we're not putting ourselves at risk of.
I don't think so.
Okay,
And then, you know,
Okay.
because some students might say, oh, well, you're a senior and you came back, that means
Yeah.
you're not doing well academically.
right,
You
right.
know, so I understand your point. That I don't have a significant concern about that.
And some of our families may say, no, thanks, we're gonna come
Right.
and they have that option.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Are you saying some families can choose to stay just 2 days a week? Or
Special education students, if
Oh,
they don't
oh,
wanna go back, right, or English language learners, if they don't wanna go back March 15th and they wanna go when their peers go back, then they can do that.
Yeah, they're a hybrid student and we'll work through that.
Okay.
Okay, so. What do you, I mean,
so
You want
I
a
mean,
motion?
yeah, I mean, I think we're ready
Is that
for a
what you're looking
vote.
for? Okay.
I'll
Do you have
make-
any, well, hold on, do you have any other comments or anything?
no, I mean, knowing that we can, you know, keep an eye on the metrics and revisit this as needed is enough for me.
Okay,
Absolutely.
all right. Okay, may I have a motion then?
Move to approve the plan as presented.
Second?
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. We've all talked a lot tonight, but any additional school board member comments before we go to closed session?
I have one. That's it. I just wanted to say well done to our wrestlers today, and I want them to know that their community is proud of them. So 8 of our wrestlers went to states today, and 6 of them placed.
Oh, that's great.
And I think this was the sport that I personally was the most concerned about working out, just because of the nature of the sport. And I'm just really, really, really proud of our coaches and our athletes. And then I know the swim team. I'm not on Twitter, so I'm not really up to date on all the.
We've had multiple postponements of their championship meet, and now it's scheduled for March the 6th. So their season has been over for a week or a little better now. So they're continuing to practice, and they won't have an opportunity to participate in the state level competition until March 6th.
Awesome. Well, good luck to them too.
Anyone else?
I would just like to say that, I hope that I don't come across as, constantly negative, and I know I am blunt and I'm very focused on numbers and data, but I just want to say that doesn't mean that I think that this year's school year hasn't been as successful as it could be given the circumstances. And my reservations have nothing to do with the ability of the school to implement a safe program for our students. So I just want to say, I'm not trying to constantly be negative and Debbie Downer, but I am really focused on numbers and data, and that makes me feel warm and fuzzy. So when everything lines up and matches.
So I have a couple things to say, but for the plan to move forward to 4 days, I know, again, we'll probably be criticized on why aren't we going back full time, 5 days a week? Well, because we have social distancing of 3 to 6 feet that we have to make sure we do, and so we cannot fit all our students into our buildings. So it's not that we don't want to. If we couldn't, if we could, we would, but we do have space constraints. So I want to make that very clear. It's sometimes it's difficult to see these comments on social media with folks thinking this isn't something we want to do. So there's a reason we cannot do it. I also want to go back to salaries really quick, because as I was listening to everybody, I felt like I kind of contradicted myself. So I mentioned that this idea of our school district not having merit-based salary increases, right? We don't call them merit-based. And then I commented on how hard our administration has worked this year as well. So I can understand why both these comments may contradict each other. So while we might not be merit-based system, nonetheless, a dollar amount or percentage number can and most often does translate into value, meaning does my employer value me? So good, bad, or indifferent, school system or not, I think this is generally how most people feel when raises are being considered in your field, in your, wherever you work. So just like I said earlier, we've had to defend our teachers like never before, and our focus has always been about them. And now I sit here and say, well, I'm not in favor of differentiating salary percentage increases between administrator and teachers, because I feel strongly that everyone has worked incredibly hard this year. Obviously, I'm willing to have further discussion regarding our salary splits, but I am also coming from a place of understanding that what we decide to do with the money we receive from the Board of Supervisors, our discussion will be a tell-all of how we value our employees for those that are here. I absolutely 100% understand the need to recruit and us to be competitive. All of it to me is a priority, but my comments earlier, just, I think it's human nature when folks see that salaries increases are coming, whether it's cost of living or whatever the field. I just feel like there's always that little thing about how does my employer value me? So in some ways I'm coming from that headspace. So I just wanted to explain that to you all. Anyway, those were my comments. Mr. Catlett, thank you for your analysis on salaries. I appreciate that. I know it's not easy. And then obviously, Dr. Bishop coming up with this plan for reopening and all our administrators who are part of that. And I just want to do a big shout out to Mr. Trineri because I know his job is not easy. And I think he's one of our unsung heroes. So thank you, Mr. Trineri. May I have a motion to convene in closed session?
I move to convene a closed session to discuss personnel matters, including appointments, resignations, and retirements pursuant to Code of Virginia 2.2-3711A. 1, the estimated time required for the closed session is 15 minutes, and action is expected.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
I move to reconvene in open session.
Ms. Carhofer, is there a second?
Second.
Mr.?
Aye.
Thanks so much. Okay.
Pursuant to Code Section 2.2-371QD of the Code of Virginia, do you certify that to the best of your knowledge during the closed session just concluded, the Clarke County School Board discussed only matters lawfully exempt for the open meeting requirements under Section 2.2-3711 of the Code and identified in the motion convening the closed session? Ms. Carhofer?
Aye.
Ms. Ryan? Mr.
Aye.
Shute?
Aye.
Ms. Singh Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Turkel?
Aye.
Thank you.
May I have a motion for action based on closed session?
Move to accept the personnel agenda as proposed.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'll adjourn the meeting.
Great.
Thanks, everyone.